Welcome back to the recap. On today's episode, we will be talking about Christen's recovery journey, her first goal back, and we'll be joined by senior writer for The Athletic, Meg Linehan. If you like what we're doing here on the recap show, please like, rate, and subscribe to YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Now let's get into the daily discussion.
Yay! Welcome back to the recap show. Here we are with the daily discussion. What shall we talk about, Tobin?
How about you?
I love talking about you. Perfect.
It's so true.
It's so true. It's embarrassing.
Welcome back to the NWSL Christen Press.
I've been back.
Reimaginers have been on a journey with you in your recovery journey, your healing journey, all of these journeys. And you had a big milestone. What was it? A couple days ago.
Yeah.
And you scored your first goal back in Christen Press fashion, which was pretty cool. Because there's 1,000 ways that you can score a goal. Like you could just like randomly hit off your shin pad and can't believe I just said shin pad and go in. And
I love when you accidentally say shin pad.
And they all count the same, but I think,
but they don't.
Not in your mind, that's for sure. But in the stat book, they do. But I just want to say it was incredible to watch you score. And you did say that, everybody else was counting kind of the days to your like return to the pitch. But for you, kind of like Christen Press isn't fully back until she scores a goal.
Well, thank you. I will say that at the very beginning of this year, and I think at this point it's even hard to get back there, but I'm 4 surgeries deep and I'm really coming to terms with the reality that I might never play soccer again.
Wow. And
it's January 1st and I made a lot of radical changes in my life on January 1st. And it all started with a vision board. And on that vision board, ladies and gentlemen, literally every single thing that I wrote on that vision board like rapidly came true. I wanted to find a home. I wanted to move. Like all of these things that like should have taken the whole year all happened in like Q1. And I was like, oh my gosh, this vision board is so powerful. I was almost afraid of the power of the vision board. And the only thing that didn't track as quickly was my soccer stuff. And on the board, it kind of had like all the things that I need to do, like get strong, get fit, get into training, get into a game. And it ended with score a goal. And in my mind, thinking now, I was like, dang it, why didn't I say like score a hat trick or like score every game that I ever played, Because like whatever I wrote down was going to happen. But it was in my mind that was so far-fetched because the idea of me even playing was almost a miracle. And so I think I was thinking like, I'm going to be in pain. I'm going to be off. And if I can just squeeze one last goal in my career, I could be satisfied.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like as being kind of a part of this journey, I think it's so crazy because for most people now, like watching you now, they're like, well, of course she would come back and of course she would score because she's Christen Press. But it's just so crazy because the reality was like not so many months ago, like we were asking the question if you would ever have the opportunity to even put on your kit again.
I know.
Like would even be able to be in that position. So we talked about this and how we were like, you have to dream new dreams because what you've now like
the vision board is like closed up. It's been packed up. Thank you. I'm going to do a little burning ceremony and it's time to turn the page.
Yeah.
I got to dream bigger dreams.
And it's so powerful to see and it's so powerful to witness. It really is. And it's been a real gift and you are really, really inspiring. Let's talk about the journey a little bit more to get to this. So I think it's taken a great deal. Like everybody knows it's going to take such hard work and, like you've had medical like miracles at this point. But the amount of humility and patience and grace. These aren't the things that we talk enough about or share enough about in this journey. And I'd love you to be able to maybe just give us some stories about what that was like for you.
I mean, one thing that's interesting about this recovery journey is like, it's 2.5 years, right? But like, it's 2.5 years starting at 33 when like a lot of players are already retired. So when you come back, first of all, I had to emotionally get prepared for the fact that I couldn't come back. And so now when you come back, like you're 35 turning 36, right? And you don't know what your body's capable of, even if you had been playing that whole time. And I feel like this experience has been actually like coming back from the dead. I keep saying this, but like something inside of me was like closed and something has reopened. And I don't mean to say that like, oh, I don't want to get back. I want to get better. It's even bigger than that. It's like, I want to play differently. I want to play with more joy. I want to play in an evolved way. And I thought that the 2.5 years of being injured was going to like do that for me. And then when I got back, I would just like be this next level player. But what I'm realizing is that 2.5 years gave me a lot of space to emotionally grow. But now is when I grow as a player, right? And now there's this new phase I'm in where the team's been playing without me for a very long time, right? So I'm trying to fit into what's there. And a lot of things have grown in the NWSL and it's great, but there's a lot of humility that's being required of me to walk out into a stadium and realize and accept, like, this game isn't being played for me. It doesn't revolve around me. And it's, you know, a really, really nasty, disgusting tasting humble pie that I've been eating. I really don't like the humble pie. I don't like the flavor of it. Because it's like, yeah, I go to my pregame and I'm not in the lineup. I go out to the field and, you know, I don't know what my role is going to be on the day. And I you know, as I travel, I walk past our starting lineup in first class back into the back of the plane. And it's like a lot of just like shifting things that you never think about when you think about coming back, that they are teaching me a lot.
You spoke about even before this, like that you didn't want to come back to the game the same. And I think when you said that, you were actually talking about from more of an emotional perspective of how you felt. But you said something interesting that really actually I've been really inspired by. And it wasn't you saying, you even said that about the way that you want to come back as a soccer player recently. And you said, I'm excited to figure out who is the 35-year-old 4 knee surgeries back from an ACL, like what kind of footballer is she? Like, how is she going to score goals? Like, how is she going to contribute to her team winning and being successful? And I thought that was just like so cool, and something that we can all just learn from. Is I think we're always constantly kind of in our minds, like we want to go back to like a version of ourselves, like whether it's a good moment, like, or our prime, you know, something. And I'm just really inspired by you being in the present moment and experiencing the present moment and saying, like, I want to experience this moment to the fullest. I want to see what this moment is going to give me. I want to see who I could be, who I could become. And I don't want to get back to like the best version of myself as a soccer player that I knew. What could be the best version of a soccer player that I know moving forward? And to have that perspective coming off what you've experienced is so powerful.
Yeah, no, thank you. I feel like it's living on a never-ending ascension, which is something we say to each other a lot, because the body's limited, but like the mind, the spirit's infinite. So who knows what physical changes I've gone through, but I know what emotional and spiritual changes I've gone through, right? And that's going to look different on the field.
Yeah.
So I think I said I can't wait to go watch the goal back and see how I look. I did look pretty quintessential vintage. It didn't look very different. But I think that there is, endless possibility, even in athletes where we're kind of taught it's not.
Yeah.
There's infinite possibility. And I think one thing that I would like to say is actually through this whole journey, you have really helped me keep that perspective of staying attached to the game, but not attached to who I was, if that makes sense. And as a goal scorer, every single time you go 90 minutes, one game without scoring a goal, you think, am I ever going to score again? It's just that something that happens, right? And you just tell that little evil wolf to shut up, and you tell the one that says you're the best, like, come on, like, we got to do this again, right? And, to go that many days since June 11th, 2022, not scoring a goal, it was like, I don't even know how I could ever believe I would score again. And you said, let's watch you score goals. And so we started this ritual, Tobin and I, before my game, where we go on YouTube and we Google Christen Press, or we YouTube Christen Press. And I think we've watched every single professional goal I've ever scored in the for the US and in the NWSL.
Bangers are pong bangers.
And it's so funny because you see the jerseys changing. You see my hairstyle changing. I'm my face is thinning out from the baby face in the beginning. And but I think it was something that you suggested that I do, so that I think what you said actually is,
you can't find yourself in the current game. You play such a unique style. The way that you score, your craft is so unique that you can't see it in the game. So if you're just watching it, trying to be oh, how do I fit into the NWSL now? There's not a version of a Christen Press in the NWSL now. So I was let's remind ourselves who Christen Press is, how Christen Press scores. And
was it fun?
It was so fun. We literally were we were celebrating, we would watch the goals. And I suggest people do this because these goals are insane.
Wait, I thought you were suggesting that they go watch themselves, to young players. You mean just watch my goals?
Go watch these goals, because we were celebrating. We were whoa, that was awesome. And then we were talking about her, she was sitting right there. We were wow, that was a good one. High-fiving each other, clapping, watching her own goals, which was really, really fun. And we were also critiquing them, of course. And then, we kind of kept going, and we were okay, what's the evolution? What can we look to next? And, I suggested my good friend Thierry Henry.
What's next? We went back even further to the past.
Yeah, I mean, because the truth is, of course, you can be inspired by many different players, but I think what makes you unique is your specific style of play and the way that you approach finishing. And it will always be unique to you. And we needed to obviously find the repetition, because you didn't have the repetition of scoring goals for 2 years. So it's how do you find that? And also, how do you find that when you're limited? You had to come back in the middle of a season when, your teams has a lot of different objectives than maybe your individual objectives are. And it's really complicated. It's really hard. And we were how can we work within this rigid structure of the timing of you coming back and the expectations of your team, and then also your personal ambitions? And how can we work within that framework to also work?
Yeah.
And that was something I found a lot of joy in this process, helping you with, is how to develop and continue to put belief into you, because belief can go two ways. And we talk about this all the time. You can have belief that you're going to, come back, score a goal, but there's also a reverse. There's a belief that can be equally as strong. And I'm going to use the word belief because it's a powerful thing, both in the positive and negatives. You can believe that you won't come back, that you won't be able to do it. And actually, the public belief of you not being able to do something is going to be so much stronger than you actually doing it. Because I think after you do it, everybody's yeah, of course, we knew she was going to do that. But I bet you, within your locker room, within your team, there was a tremendous amount of belief that you were never going to be able to do what you just did again.
Well, I will say, and I know this for sure, I am a very confident person, you know that. But the amount of confidence that was required to go through such a long way away from the game was only possible because I knew that one of the best players to ever play believed that I could do it. And not just because and all the time I doubted and I would be like, wait, Tobin, remind me I can do this, right? Because it mattered to me that you're one of the best and you thought I could do it. Uh-oh, she's getting emotional, folks.
No, I'm not. The camera's not on me. Mateo! You dirty dog over there.
But also, you were able to help me in every way of the game because you were the best across the board. Not just, technically, tactically, but also, with your mentality. And getting through this, I actually felt like it was an unfair advantage because I had my force and your force both getting me through this. So we scored a goal. Let's score a lot more. Tobin and I are lucky that we get to speak to some of the coolest athletes and changemakers. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out past episodes where we've had such amazing guests. And for today, Tobin, who do we have?
We have one of the most influential journalists of all time in women's football, Meg Linehan.
Let's bring her in.
Let's do it. She covers, writes, and talks all things women's football. Welcome, Meg Linehan.
We should probably do it again since it's Linehan.
Oh my God, that's not the first time. And I asked the first time.
This is so good. Speaking like a true journalist, making sure we get her name right. Meg Linehan.
There you go.
Okay. Welcome, Meg Linehan.
You know what's really funny is the first 3 times we say your name before this, it's going to be wrong.
That's so true.
So now we're going to have to keep this whole bit in, just so everyone understands.
The best edit right there. Yeah. Okay. So I usually start, a lot of times we have footballers on this show, and I really feel like, Meg, you are one of the gals, through and through. If we had somebody else on the team, the 12th woman, it would be Meg. Right?
Yeah.
It totally would. We've lived through a lot.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to start at your chapter 1.
Okay.
So if you were to write a biography, which I'm sure you probably have done or are currently doing.
Autobiography.
Okay, fine. An autobiography. Fine, we'll make it about Meg. Because she's here. What would be your chapter 1?
I think probably 99 World Cup and watching that, right? I feel like I'm very much of that generation that watched the 99 World Cup and was like, oh, because I played soccer, right? All that kind of stuff. But 99 World Cup was really, I think, the turning moment. And what is really funny is I feel like a lot of players watched the 99 World Cup and said, I want to do that. And meanwhile, I had a binder of every news clipping I could find.
Wow.
Which at the time, I did not know I wanted to be a writer by any stretch. So it is really funny for me to go back and be like, oh, the signs were there.
Yeah.
We know. But right after the 99 World Cup, WUSA, the first women's pro league, starts. I live outside of Boston. They were hiring interns and they allowed a small idiot 15-year-old child to come in and work in the press box.
Oh my gosh, you were 15.
I was 15, maybe 16 at that point.
Wow.
And so in high school, they give you giant Adidas polos that are just absolutely massive on you. And I was in the press box, and this was well before Twitter existed. So I was writing updates from the game in HTML.
Oh my
so
God.
funny. That
so if you went
so
to
much.
BostonBreakers.net or whatever the URL was, it was me being like, the Breakers had a corner kick. And here's
That's
so
how it all started.
Yeah, there's a really old school photo of me and all the Boston Breakers players from that first year. And that was Christine Lilly, right?
Yeah, that was a good team.
Yeah, that was a good team.
Yeah. Wow, Boston Breakers.
Yeah, okay, this is it was a very visceral feeling I had when you were a lot of players watched and they're thinking I can do that. What do you think about you made you think I want to share this out, right? Because the 99 moment was the moment where we could feel the inflection. You can feel it happening. Right. And actually coverage is so essential, right?
Yeah.
But I was 11. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that these athletes look like superheroes because someone made them.
Right.
I just was like, they are superheroes. I'm 11, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you think you in your journey got to the point where you realized the importance of sharing stories?
That's a really good one. I mean, I think, I went off to college and went down to DC, went to American University. I actually essentially got adopted by a band when I was in college. And yes, like a little indie
What does
band.
that mean?
It's literally, I was a freshman. I saw them play in like our little, it wasn't a bar, but it was essentially like the student space. And just kind of kept showing up to their concerts, and they were like, okay, I guess we're friends now. So,
so you weren't in the band?
No, absolutely
I was
not.
like, wow, plot twist.
No, not in the slightest. But what was really funny is like I would help them out with like web stuff and trying to like get people to shows and things like that. And so,
interesting.
yeah, or like making T-shirts, or like I frequently would sell the merchandise at a show, and they actually opened for Coldplay once. Like that was their big show. But I think when you are a small little indie band in the early aughts trying to like break out, storytelling is really important in trying to figure out like how do we actually get people out here and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that was, even though completely unrelated to sports, really helpful, and also got me very into photography. My dad is a photographer, but like I would take photos at shows. And then when I actually got back into women's soccer post 2011 World Cup, I couldn't actually find a place to write. I started with photography for Equalizer Soccer.
Wow. Well, I just realized that there is a crossover because I feel like the start of what was WUSA and then WPS and NWSL was kind of like a small indie band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It kind of like very similar
it had the
vibes.
same feels, right?
Yeah, you're trying desperately to get people to show up, right? Like
you're taking the pictures, you're selling the merch, you're doing it all, you're wearing many hats.
Yeah, 100%.
And you were there at the very beginning.
Yeah.
What was it about, you said that you played soccer, but what was it about then covering soccer that kind of gave you that little like glitter in your eyes that I just saw about the indie band? Like what was that connection where you were like, there's something about that I really want to be around?
Yeah, I think there was, well, first of all, like no one else was doing it, right? No one else. We've talked about this a lot of just like you'd come out to kind of mixed zone, right? It was usually just people standing out on the field being like, okay, we're here to talk to you, I guess, right? It was a very different time, to say the least. WPSL Elite that one summer, right? I just remember Heather O'Reilly getting swarmed by college kids who wanted to take photos with her. Like it was just truly a really different time. And so I think there was this sense of there is a story here and something is being built. And I think especially coming from that Boston Breakers point of view, Leslie Osborne was a player that like I had gotten really tight with, and she was going into boardrooms in Boston trying desperately to get support for that team. And so I think I could see it from the players of how important that sort of connection was, and trying to sell the story of this team and the league forming for NWSL, and then to have it just kind of end there didn't really make sense.
Yeah.
Right. And like we knew that people were interested. 2011, I think that semifinal game against Brazil, right? That was, I think, that turning moment of that decade, and knowing, okay, there are people ready for this. But how do you reach them?
Yeah. Did it ever frustrate you, like talking about that kind of like tentpole moments or the tentpole moments that had more energy? Did it ever frustrate you that it would be this big moment and then you would, show up at the next game and there would be nothing?
I mean, but that was as recent as 2019. I mean, that has not ended. I remember going to the World Cup in France in 2019, coming back, and my first game back was Sky Blue in front of under 2,000 people.
Wow.
And talking to Laura Harvey, who's coaching Seattle at the time, and just kind of being like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not that has always been, I think, one of the fundamental tensions of women's soccer in this country, is that you do have these big explosive moments, and then you go back to reality.
Yep.
And you have to figure out not only how do you take advantage of the wave that's going to come in, but also with every wave you get people pulling back out too.
Yeah.
And so, or they're just there for the big moment.
Yeah.
And I think you can plan as best as you want, but it's also just a reality that you kind of have to accept in this space. I think we saw it again with the Olympics this summer.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, covering the U.S. women's national team both before and after that Olympics, right? Like, I mean, people weren't showing up at some of those final friendlies of last year.
Yeah.
The attendance numbers were really, really grim.
Yeah.
and there was not a lot of energy. And then you go to those Olympics, the Olympics are a completely different vibe than the World Cup, and suddenly everybody's back on board. Yeah. So it's just, I think some of these are realities that have to be accepted, and some of them you just have to try to ride the wave and actually just hope, right? Like that all of those plans can actually take advantage of those
just
moments.
Hope the U.S. Women's National Team wins another.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what's so fun and interesting right now, is that this is changing, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we've seen it in the NWSL this year of the international influences, whether it's Temwa Chwenga or Barbara Banda. I mean, like any number of players, but the fact that I would say the two front runners for MVP right now are both international players.
Oh, great. We really want to talk about
we
this.
do. Yeah.
Okay, but I want to like kind of hone in on something that you said. There's a reality that we have players that have lived that we always kind of knew that was, in order to create change, we just had to keep winning. Mm-hmm. And what did that look like from your perspective? Because right now I'm seeing this picture of like, we were kind of always in this together, but I didn't really know that. I knew that with my teammates, but it didn't just take the players to create this like storyline of women's soccer. So what was sort of your rallying cry of, because it isn't just like, let's hope, it's putting down the building blocks and being willing to cover games when there's 1,500 people there.
Right.
So what was sort of your rallying cry to get yourself to believe that it could be better?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've thought a lot about infrastructure of media coverage of the sport, probably too much, right? I mean, when I started at The Athletic, there was no full-time women's soccer writer in this country, right? I came over from the NWSL proper, which was a place where you could actually like have resources because you were the league and you kind of had to, right? Mm-hmm. But coming back out onto this other side, and I think in the more, post 2015, U.S. Women's National Team, NWSL has made it past year 4, right? Because when you think about NWSL, the first 3 years were just like, can it survive past 3 years? Mm-hmm, right? Like that was the yearly question.
It was haunting.
It was like the budget was so...
We were like, it was 3 years. Now we have 2 years. Now it's the last year. Definitely going to be the last year.
Right. And so I think it's still very much an ongoing process because I can't come in here and speak for the entire industry, but be like, pretend like we've solved it. We've done it. Like we've got all this coverage now, because that's not what is happening. But I do think that there is a sense of like, yes, we're in it together. Yes, like obviously we are rooting for the sport to survive because we want to cover it. Yep. But I think that there also is, a difference, and that like when you're like, I don't want to be your friend, right? Like I need to have that distance with you in order to cover the sport, in order to say like, okay, like this is going wrong, or, whatever, right? I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten messages from players being like, oh, your power rankings, like, go. And I'm like, this is part of the gig, man. I don't know what to tell you, right? And that's fine. Like, that's totally fine. And it's honestly very funny sometimes of like, yeah, there is going to be this natural tension, right? But I think that there is this bigger concept of, while the infrastructure of the league got built, while the infrastructure of, or like equal pay was happening, right? Of the sense that the media coverage had to be there alongside of all of these things. Because if the media coverage wasn't there, then like you need that cycle, nobody right? Knows, you need that sort of virtuous hand-holding. And so while I think there has to be distance in a lot of ways, there also does have to be this understanding. And I will say, like, a player who I think has always understood what that relationship is like is Megan Rapinoe, in knowing I can get something out of them. They want something out of me. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And I can give them that quote, and then they can then blow that quote up.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
Totally.
And so I think that is, so for me as a reporter, coming up alongside this entire generation of players, and especially someone like Megan Rapinoe, right? Who has always known, okay, I'm going to come in here and I can play them like a fiddle.
What
in
to do
a really
with the
good way,
yeah.
right? Like in a really good way.
Mm-hmm.
That has been such an interesting thing, and I think is really different now. I think players' relationships with media is really different. I think the media landscape of the sport itself has changed really drastically from when I was starting, right? Yeah. And not in the way of, when I first started covering women's soccer, I was paying out of pocket to cover women's soccer. Like, I have never done the math because I don't want to do the math, but it's decent
maybe
number.
you're breaking even now.
Yeah, I would like to. Yeah, like now I'm paid to do it, which is great. But there are a lot of people who are still not really getting paid to do it, or they're freelancing, right? Like that part of the infrastructure still has to get built. But the actual, I think, relationship has changed a little bit because I think now players expect a lot of this in a way where, I mean, I remember going to national team games in like 2012 and sitting on a field with Kelly O'Hara for 20 minutes, just like talking for an and like that would not happen now, right? Like, it's just a very different vibe.
You're hitting a lot of all the things
that we've been
talking about.
Yeah. So honestly, circling back to the major stories of the NWSL this year and the top goal scorers, Tobin and I were kind of reflecting on the difference in what we know about those players versus what I perceive that the fans know about us.
Yeah.
And kind of why that is. And this kind of modernization of media, there's in some ways makes you feel that we're closer. But in some ways, I'm looking around at all the best players in the NWSL right now being like, I don't really know what they're up to.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how many times I've heard Barbara Branda talk.
Yeah. I mean, I've met her a couple times in person. I've seen her speak, but I do think it is, and I think we've run, when she signed with the league, one of our writers talked with her but yeah, I think it is a little different, right? Of just, there is a saturation for US players in terms of having the market covered. And like, I think there is this familiarity because like you're seeing them with the US national team, then they go back to the NWSL teams. And so like, you can follow the storylines really easily, right? Like it's just, we're hitting pause for international breaks or whatever it is. Whereas, I mean, we don't really get any good coverage in the US at least of Barbara Banda, right? When she goes, unless it's in a major international tournament. Like we see a lot about the goals she'll score at the Olympics, but we're not really talking about like what the team is doing tactically or anything like that. And that's still where, again, like there's a lot of infrastructure that is still very much needing to be built. I mean, I don't know if any of us could come up with like any meaningful facts about what the Malawi women's national team looks like.
Yeah.
Good. Right? Like that is, I think, a really tough one. And it's just hard in terms of access too, right? Like trying to get that story told is going to, that's a deep dive that like you're going to spend a while on trying to figure out how to even crack it.
Yeah. You reference like sitting down on the field with Kelly O'Hara after a game for 20 minutes or whatever. And I'm wondering like, it's so funny because we talked about how this felt like it changed for us with the national team, where it did feel like in the early days, there was that access.
Right.
And there was that storytelling, like even with the types of media that US Soccer would put out. Like we were talking about, like when there was Studio 90.
Or when baby Aaron Heifetz doing his little interview.
And like, that kind of, like you would kill for that type of access, right?
100%.
Like, but then what happened with the media, and this is the way like we see it through our eyes, is then brands came in and they started buying media. And then you lost all authenticity and all access to the players because now there was a transaction going on that the players weren't participating in, but they were being used to drive the value of that media. So then for us as players, we said, we're not doing branded media if we're not going to be participating in the upside of this.
Right.
And then there was kind of this distaste and the access was kind of denied to media and to the storytelling, I think. And now I feel like the league and the US Women's National Team, we're in a lot different of a position. Not there yet, but I think we're in a different position. And I think that there needs to be more access to allow more storytelling within the sport.
I mean, so I think to start, there's almost like, I view it as 4 pillars, right? So you have the kind of standard journalism, right? Whether it's athletic, whatever that is. Then I think there's athlete driven. So right here, honestly, like I would put just women's sports too in that bucket.
Yep.
Then you have like team and club content, and then you have the brands. And they've all grown at really different rates. So to your point, like the brand stuff is strong, right?
Yeah.
And I think women's soccer is getting better in general at league and club content. I think we've seen some really good improvements on that front. The athlete stuff is really new. right? Yeah. And I think that's a really important part. But I think to your point too, the access is also like, can you actually get a player on the phone? And there's two parts to that too, because it's, for me, I'm a national writer, right? So like I can't be a beat. I already don't sleep enough as it is, right? Like I like to hang out with my wife and my dog. Like I want to have a life outside of the job. But then you have to support your beat writers, your national writers, your local TV, right? Like there's even demos within that.
Yeah.
And so you've got to figure out how do you approach all four of those pillars. So there's part one. But then I talk to folks who maybe are outside the little bubble, right? When an ESPN wants to come in and do something. And I'm like, can I just like, how's your experience getting access? And I get the look that I'm just like, like, you would think that they would say like, hello, like, of course. That's not what is typically happening. And I think it's really tough because for me, like, we can have this conversation, but it's also a really inside baseball conversation. And I think it's also something that fans are never like, oh, you can't get this person on the phone, right? Like, it's hard to kind of say, no, it is important for the league to get media coverage. Like, when I get a story in the New York Times that does actually do something, right? Like, there still is a benefit to having a physical newspaper have a women's sports story.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's, I think, some of the bigger conversations. There used to be mix zones in the NWSL.
Yeah.
We lost those during COVID. We've tried to have conversations about bringing mix zones back. And I think there is this immediate struggle because I don't know if there are enough people to sustain mix zones right?
I think your point of like, you know, maybe why some particular players, international players, aren't getting covered, that makes a lot of sense. Do you believe, and I promise I'm going somewhere, do you believe that like you know as much about Sophia Smith as you do about me or Tobin?
No.
So it is also the way that we're telling stories in this like modern era. And I think it's really fascinating because like I believe, as someone who's on the other side of it, that my brand was created. It was created by me and by the media. And it is a big part of Nike and, you know, sunscreens and like all the things that
blogging.
And Tobin always says, wow, you were so smart for writing that Rookie for Life blog. She always tells me
like that kind of storytelling. Could you imagine if there was like a player writing a blog on their experiences like today?
Yeah. I mean, for a while, The Athletic actually did have an NWSL confidential. Sort of like where it was a player who I still don't know what player it was.
Wow,
like
that's cool.
Talking about
very gossip.
It was like early Athletic days.
Oh yeah, sorry, you were going somewhere.
Okay, no, but I was going to the other side of it because I think we're sitting here and I do think there's good reasons that players have been like, hey, limited access, want more privacy. I get that. And it's just this weird juxtaposition between like what social media has done to connect us and to isolate us, that it's just like mind-boggling. So one thing that Tobin and I talk about all the time, and one thing that we respect so much about you is every single time there's an important women's soccer story, I know you're going to write about it, and I know you're going to be additive. You are going to find the extra detail, find the nuance, find a new perspective. And that to me is incredibly valuable. So when you said like, there is a point, there really is.
That is journalism.
It is. And what I think we find now is so many outlets are going for the amplification to the point of nausea and exhaustion, where like I can post a stupid story of myself like waving a sword around and it just gets like
I did see your do not repost. I had such a moment of delight. I was just like, oh, Tobin, it's like you're back on like early days Tumblr even, right? Like that's the vibe.
Yeah.
So good.
It's like because it just it is. It's I am like wondering what is that?
It feels exploitative to
and it feels like cheap journalism. You know,
I mean, and what I tried to have this conversation with Sarah Spain too, right? When I was on her podcast, because like I super appreciate that, but I can't be on every story, right? Like like it's physically impossible, and I think there's ones right now where like I feel like there are absolutely stories to be told, like there's investigations that need to be done, and also like I have other things that I've been assigned to do. So part of it too is I think understanding like I'm not always in control of like what my daily list looks like. I have a podcast that like has to get done on a weekly basis. And sometimes
a great podcast.
sometimes like things are going to get dropped because of that. And like, I don't want it to be an excuse, but I do think like, this is why
you can't be the only one doing a good job.
You're not the savior, like if there's of the journalism in like women's sports, like, and I mean, it's kind of a burden though that you have taken on.
Yeah, but I think
she's like, I know.
Yeah, it's like I keep thinking like everybody being like, we don't want Meg to be the HR of NWSL anymore, and like, yes, agree, but also like,
so where's everyone else?
I mean, that is part of it, right? But I think like there are absolutely stories right now that are happening that need good coverage, but also those stories don't happen overnight, right? Like you have to like, I think, have time. I mean, honestly, the major story I did on the NWSL in 2021, the first phone call I got, I want to say was in May, and that story published in September.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of things sometimes like, you can't speak until you're ready to speak, or like you can't write until you're ready to write, or like there are things that I will know that I'm going to carry with me and have like guilt about carrying because I can't get them across the line.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really, really interesting to hear. And we did want to talk about 2021.
Yeah.
And I'd love to actually just start by like kind of recentering like our audience on what that was.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna actually read because I feel like it's
great,
just best to be said. So this was during a time when the NWSL in general has undergone many allegations and reports of sexual harassment, misconduct, racist and sexist remarks, sexual, verbal, and emotional abuse, just to name a few. Sally Yates, who did the investigation at the time after stories had broken, many of them were your stories that broke about the abuse in the NWSL. She wrote that abuse in the NWSL is rooted in a deeper culture in women's soccer, beginning in youth leagues that normalize verbally abusive coaching and blurred boundaries between coaches and players. Now, in 2021, 5 out of 10 coaches were fired or stepped down due to misconduct allegations. Before the investigation, there were no written rules to reprimand these coaches and other people of authority in the NWSL for misconduct for the first 9 years of the league. Meg, you broke the abuse story in the NWSL, or multiple stories. Part of it was part of breaking the stories. Can you take us back to the first thought that you had when you realized that there was abuse going on in the league?
I mean, I think part of what finding out the depth is everything kind of reassembles in your brain of like, oh, I saw you start putting pieces together in a way that you haven't, because again, coming out of Boston, before I moved to New York City, I don't know if you remember where the Breakers used to play on that like tiny field on the Harvard campus, not in the stadium, but like, so we were right above the coaches because there was no press box. It didn't exist. And so you could hear everything. And so I remember thinking like, oh yeah, okay, like I've heard some things, and suddenly like things are making a little more sense, right? But to, I think, get the full depth of what was happening in, Portland in 2015, but also before that was Sinead Farley and her story. I mean, that first day I just remembered honestly just sitting in shock, trying to like grapple with how big it was and knowing, okay, I'm not an investigative reporter by trade. Like, let's just also put it in context of like, I studied literature in college. I have fortunately like been in newsrooms where I have like learned a lot of these skills on the fly. But again, a lot of us in these spaces are coming from sort of learning on the job. So fortunately, we did have Katie Strang, who's an investigative reporter at The Athletic, who is also on that byline of the main story that we wrote, was massively, massively helpful, not just in terms of like getting a lot of the smaller details of an investigation correct, but also like truly emotionally supporting me and like walking me through the beats of like, you're going to be really mad some days, you're going to be really sad some days, you're going to feel like you're going to puke. Like your body's going to physically react to reporting this story. So I think that's just really important. Oh yeah, the day before that story dropped, I woke up, and I've told this story before, but like I was brushing my teeth and I nearly like threw up into the sink because I was so nervous about having it published. And this was also after like there was a whole rumor that went around like a couple weeks before that I had been bought off by an owner to not have it published. Like there was a lot of pieces to this story, to say the least.
Was there any truth to that?
Nope. Like we hadn't even had a conversation with that owner. So it was very interesting, to say the least, of like, and I'm hearing this stuff very secondhand too, of like, hey, I got this call about this. And anyway, but yeah, early, it was really just, I think the first step was really just listening to the stories and sitting with them and understanding, okay, like I've got to sit in this for a bit and try to figure out how do we make sure that we can report this as well as humanly possible.
And you said that took how long?
So first call I do think was in May, and then the story ran September 30th.
Wow.
2021.
Wow. And I in all seriousness, like that's why when I say like, oh, Meg, you're like a gal, because I think until you've experienced the things that we have in this generation of sport and, you know, even the development of it, that like unless you've been like brushing your teeth wanting to puke because of what the things that you've either personally experienced or been around in this league, like you don't get it.
Yeah. No, I think and there were other parts of the, like, as all of this is going on too, Molly Hensley Clancy is doing like really crucial reporting. Obviously, like you spoke with her at the Washington Post. And like that's the thing that makes me honestly, in a strange way, so happy about this, is that like it was not just one story, right? That contributed to this. Like obviously like it was not just one coach too, right? But the fact that there was a story about what happened in Portland, about what happened in Chicago, about like Washington, Seattle, like North Carolina, right? Like all of these stories were happening, and also in a very strange way, independently of each other too, right? And this was also when Michelle Kang was trying to come into the league and take over the Washington Spirit. All of that was happening at the same time. So part of, honestly, that story too was even just trying to juggle the fact that like we knew multiple things were happening all at the same time. And how do you make sure that this main story that you know is going to be the story does not get lost? And also the Olympics are happening, COVID is happening, right? Like all of these things are happening all at the same time. But also going through the rigors of reporting, of trying to talk to someone, players from every single team that Paul Riley had ever coached. Knowing that at the end of the day, like you have to go to Paul Riley for comment. You have to go to the league. You have to go to these clubs. You have to go to the owners. And so, yeah.
Did you set out with an intent to have your writing transform and change lives in this way? How did you find the bravery to do that? Because I think I can think about in my own situations where I see things that are not right happening in environments and to me and to others. And I've seen so many players not be able to find that, which is okay. You know, it shouldn't be on players. And I've tried to look for it myself in times like, how can I speak about this? How can I be brave for myself and for others? And we always understand that as players, we're putting ourselves at risk when we speak.
Right.
But the same is true. Like when you're talking about brushing your teeth, it was like because you were putting your neck out.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I knew like at this point, the story was so strong. I was like, they can't, like if my credential gets pulled, like all I have to say is like they pulled my credential and like that's going to be another story. Right. Yeah. So I think there was a level of insulation. And also I think the whole challenge of reporting a story like that is also the amount of legal that I had to go through, right? Just to make sure that we were in a place where like players aren't getting put in a place of danger too, right? And obviously having Alex Morgan go on record is a massive step, right? And these two players willing to like go pose for photos. I mean, like, Monishim was legit in Hawaii trying to do a remote photo shoot for that story, right? So I think the fact that players were brave enough to go on record, Alex was brave enough to be an ally like that. So I never felt like personally like, okay, this is going to come back to me. I mean, I have been told, and I feel pretty confident I am a type 1 on the Enneagram, right? So I think that plays a role in probably...
Gosh, we can't get rid of these
ones are everywhere.
So I do think like that does... Like you can't hear that story and not be like, okay, now I know it, right? And I mean, to be fair, like I know other things that have happened in this league that I have not been able to report. I talked to other people who ended up in the Yates report for a potential story who were not at that point ready to talk. And part of it is just saying like, okay, you're not ready. Like this is your story. Like I'm not going to force you into a place that you're not comfortable yet. Right. And so I think when I go into a reporting situation like that, I always try to say like, I can't guarantee anything. Like that's not the job, right? I can't guarantee you a result. I can't guarantee you a story even at this point because it might not get past a lot of different checks. But I want to have a conversation with you first so that way you can understand the process. You can decide what you're comfortable with. Like that's the, I think, really important part at the start of it. Because if you don't have that understanding going in, then you end up in a place where like, I think there is pressure on one side or the other of like, this is going to end up in a place that I'm expecting and that's not necessarily where it might be. Like I didn't go in being like, okay, I'm going to go get the NWSL commissioner fired. Right? Like at some point you realize like a lot of this has to get blown up in order for it to survive. Like that's just going to be a natural outcome of where we're heading.
Yeah. And that is a scary outcome to realize.
Right. And I think that's why after that published, I did I had a thought. I published too, like so early that day, like 7 a.m. Right. And so I'm awake at 7 a.m. waiting for reactions and like knowing also I've been through this whole emotional journey for like 6 months, but everybody is reading this. Honestly, it was like a 9,000 word story going through this emotional journey. And so like, I'm expecting everybody to be on my level by 8 a.m. And I'm like, oh, that's not what's happening here. That's not what's like people are processing. Like we've got to give it a little bit of time here. But then I did feel such a responsibility to go out and kind of talk about the story because I didn't want so many people treat women's sports like a drive-by, like car crash, right? Of like they're rubbernecking, something's gone wrong. Okay, what is? Oh, we got to find out what it is. And you only get the big mainstream coverage when something's gone really terribly wrong. And so I wanted to make sure that like someone who had done the story, who understood the league and the context, like who could both firmly say like, this is very bad. And we should be covering it because it is news and it is really important. But also, the league is the players at the end of the day. And not a commissioner and not an owner and not, XYZ, right? And so that is what ended up happening too, right? We saw the Players Association step in a really important way. And I was at Philadelphia for that game, the first game back after, because they took games off. And then they had the break in the 6th moment. And so I remember being up in the stands. I went down into the stands out of the press box. They pause the game. They do the circle holding hands. And I'm weeping. And a woman next to me like taps me and she's like, why did they stop the game? And I was like, thank you for the reminder. That like, you just have no idea.
Wow. Well, I will say that we are so grateful for your bravery, that in so many ways the league has progressed, but the most important thing is player safety. And you played such a huge role in pushing that forward. And I do understand your motivations a bit better knowing you're a 1. So that cleared a lot of things up for me. But if you haven't said it to yourself, it took a tremendous amount of risk and bravery to do what you did. And I think everyone feels a little safer knowing that while you're not the HR department, you do have a watchful eye on all of us. So we're going to quickly throw to a break and we'll be back with Meg. All right. Now it's time for everyone's favorite segment, Community Questions. Jamie from Minneapolis wants to know, between you and Christen, who is the better driver?
Oh, me.
Yeah.
100%.
Wait, I feel a little bit honored that they even asked.
This feels like a moment where we're like, do they even know us? You know what though?
We're confused by this question.
Yeah.
It is such an obvious answer. I'm even
Let me
wondering
just
what
give
our producers thought when they selected it.
Christen drove here, and halfway through the drive, I proceeded to say, is there a reason why you're not following navigation?
Well, because I've come here so many times, I knew my way.
You knew your way so well that when we pulled in, you go, is this where we're supposed to go? So that just sums that up. And also, she always raves about like the handy tools that drive for her in the car.
That's maybe why I am a good driver. Cruise control, and then basically I just let the car drive for me, and it just bounces from one line to the next, and then like automatically corrects me through the whole highway, all 50 miles that I drive to get to my training.
She thinks she has a vibrating seat, but really it's just keeping her within the lines. Okay. Melissa from Charleston wants to know, Christen, we got to hear Tobin's AIM name on the debrief. So what was yours?
Brown sugar number 09.
Was there a reason for that?
I mean, it's
just like self-proclaimed brown sugar number, or was this like a name given to you?
Well, the only thing that's unusual about that name is that I picked number 9.
Well,
everything else, doesn't it make perfect sense?
the sugar part, yeah, for sure.
Okay. Allison from Ohio asks, out of you, A-Rod, and Lauren Holiday, who would be the better pilot? Who would be the flight attendant? And who would be the passenger? Okay, wait. Before you answer, think of all three. And I'll see if we can say them at the same time. I'm going to try to guess what you're going to say.
Oh, I know. I see it clearly. So I wouldn't just go with like who would be better, but I will just say exactly how our friendship is.
Okay, wait. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to say pilot, and then we'll say a name. And then we'll say flight attendant, and then we'll say a name. And then we'll say passenger, and we'll say a name. Okay. Wait, I have to figure it out.
This is so easy for me.
Okay. Pilot. Cheney. It seems like I cheated because I was going to say Lauren, but I knew that. Okay. Flight attendant. A-Rod. I cheated again, but I got it. Okay.
Well, the
passenger. Of course, it's Tobin.
I love being a passenger. I make for a great passenger.
At first, I thought you'd be the pilot because you do love to drive and you would love to drive a plane. But then I was like,
both
obviously,
my older sisters, and I feel like A-Rod would just be like, she would just like pretend to be the best flight attendant. Like, she loves acting.
Yeah, no, so. I think that's spot on.
Yeah, that's exactly what our friendship is. Like, there was no, like, question. Like, I feel like if we were all to be asked that, it would have...
I know, I wasn't in the friend group, but I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that concludes community questions. Thank you so much to all of the reimaginers for submitting your questions. We love you. And if you would like to get your question on the show, you can join our membership. Our membership is a place where changemakers and fans come together. We talk about sports. We talk about how we can make the world a better place. We think it's the safest and coolest place on the internet. So we'd love to have you. Give it a try. We appreciate you. And thanks again. With our friends at Ally Financial, it's important to talk about why money matters in the women's game. So, Meg, over your decade-plus career covering women's sports, how have you seen the financial liberation of women athletes affect the game?
I mean, it has been, I remember year one of NWSL. There were players in Boston working at Trader Joe's during the season. I'm not joking. So shout out Maddie Evans, like a true NWSL legend, right?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a different world, I think, that we're in right now. And whether it's, we've had this conversation too of we see all this money coming into women's sports right now, and it's just a matter of like, how do you figure out how athletes are getting paid, right? And I think there's still a lot of room to be done, but the fact that there is now not just, I think, a financial piece to it, but with the new CBA, the fact that we've got no trade clauses in the NWSL, all of those pieces too, it's actually, I think, a much safer place for athletes in general. And so I think there's still a piece that needs to happen with, you know, the players who are making the minimum salary and all that kind of stuff. But as the league grows, as maybe we get the transparency piece, I mean, this is another journalistic convo that we can get into, but in men's sports, we know what players are getting paid, right? And I think that's still a little uncomfortable for people in women's sports because there's disparity and there's, you know, like even within teams, right? But how do we get to a point where players are getting paid enough where they feel confident being transparent with their salaries so that way then not only do you get the fact that you can negotiate from a much stronger position because you understand what the players around you are getting paid, but so that way we can have real meaningful coverage of what it's like to build a team and build a roster on a salary cap.
All right. Because we need more Meg Linehans.
Correct.
What financial advice would you give to a young woman who wants to pursue a career such as yours?
I mean, even I'll get into the financial part, but I do think that one of the conversations I have the most when I'm talking with like college kids who reach out to me and are like, how do I, because like, first of all, you cannot repeat my path. You cannot go intern for the Boston Breakers.
There's probably an equivalent of that right now, right?
I guess,
What would that be?
I don't know.
I was thinking we should go out and find, you know, young reporters covering indie bands. And then we'll get great reporting.
There you go. But, you know, because I hear the most like, this is my dream job. And I'm like, great. I love that for you. You're really focused on word one, dream. Great. Love it. Job is also important. 50% of the equation. Like, you are going to have terrible hours. You are going to do a lot of things that you don't like doing. Like, I'm now in a point where I can say, like, I don't want to do a vote on what player is the best because, like, I know it's going to get me yelled at. And, like, I might have my opinion, but you don't have the same opinion. And, like, we don't need to yell about it on the internet at each other because I don't care. Right? Like, I value different things. Cool. Great. End of the day. So, for me, it's always like, you have to remember it is a job. And one of the things that I think from like a financial point of view too is not just, this is where maybe like the transparency part gets really interesting because I think within the little American women's soccer NWSL world, we do share a lot of information about like how we're moving through what is a very limited job market, to say the least, right? And trying to get people hired and like, if there's an opening, how do you get someone into that opening where you know like they've got the knowledge, they've got the passion, they understand it's a job, all that kind of stuff. But like having the awareness of this is what you should be asking for. Like this is what other people and other, like don't just limit yourself to like, this is what I think a women's sports writer should be making. This is what a sports writer should be making.
Love that.
That's
right?
so good.
Like I want to compare myself to like what are NFL writers making?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's the same job at the end of the day. Right?
Maybe even harder. Because like you said, it's harder to find the answers.
Yeah, right? And so I think that's one of the really important parts is just trying to figure out like how much information you can have about the industry as a whole. And to be fair, the industry is like not the best place to work. Like, I mean, media trust is really bad right now. All of that kind of stuff is playing a role into this. There are kind of cuts everywhere. And so I think knowing that it is not necessarily the most stable profession too is really helpful. Because my first full-time women's sports job lasted under like a year and a half, maybe. And I did not know that going in. I worked at a biotech, like straight up was just like in a normal 9 to 5-ish job that supported me covering women's soccer out of pocket. And when I made the leap, it was a pay cut. It was a benefits cut. I had to move to New York City. Like
Your story like is so parallel to
A player. Yeah, it really is.
and so
great.
I think I did not go in like with eyes fully open of what this would mean. And like to be fair, I wanted to move to New York City. I was like just starting to date my wife. She was at Fordham, getting her PhD. Like a lot of things made sense, but at the same time, like I didn't know what it meant to kind of go into this full time and what the job was like and what a lot of it meant outside of like people. I think, you know, I met a college kid at the World Cup and he was just, oh, like you get to do this all the time. And I'm like, World Cups are great, but they're also like the worst month of my life.
Yeah.
Again,
Like I'm working 18 hours a day.
Very similar to how I feel.
Like there's so, like, yeah, like being at a World Cup final is amazing. Like, I love it. I love
Winning
it.
a World Cup.
Yeah, 2019.
When I won the World
truly,
Cup.
2019, like one of the best months. But I came back from the 2019 World Cup and I remember seeing my editor and I was like, I'm never doing that again in my life ever.
Oh my God, this is like, we could just switch seats right now. And like,
Right?
no one would know.
Same.
Right? Like, I'm never doing that again. And then, of course, like, I was like, I would do the Olympics, actually. I will say, like, this Olympics, totally different vibe. Loved it. It was so, there were so many trainings where I was literally, it was me and Julie Foudy and the NBC crew. I was the only reporter that was at some of these, it was me with my little recorder and Emma Hayes just being like, it's me again. Hey, what's up? Like, completely different vibe.
Wow. So. More of that.
Okay, so this young person has said, I want to be a journalist and I want to cover women's sports. What's the best part of it?
I just think, I mean, this community is like so special, right? And that I think has been one of the really cool things. I mean, I work with my best friend, Steph Young, at The Athletic, right? Like, we've known each other for a really long time. I had nothing to do with her getting hired at The Athletic, because literally the final three, I knew I was friends with all of them. I was like, I cannot be involved in this process whatsoever because I'm biased for all of them. Yeah. Because the world is so small, right? And so I think we're not really, like, precious about who gets credit for, you know, like, we're all kind of in it together. And I think that's kind of like the vibe across the board. And it's changing a little bit, right? And I think it has to change. But the run so far, I think, has been just really special in terms of connections and, like, I don't know, being at the Olympics or being at the World Cup. Like, my wife actually, she is not a sports person. Like, she's been to, I want to say now 4 women's soccer games all time. One of them was Sky Blue's only win of that, like, terrible season. And then, like, the World Cup final. Those were her first 2.
Oh, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But she was at the World Cup final texting me like, why am I so stressed right now? And I was just like, yeah, welcome to sports. Welcome to sports. And so I think that has been a really fun part, too, of just being able to, I don't know, be at these, like, major moments and feel like that pressure. Right? Of like, I've got to have the best story ever come out of this, right? Which is, I don't know, it's its own specific kind of pressure. And I think now I'm able to maybe play in that space a little bit more. Like, obviously, when they won gold this summer, I had to, like, cover that they won gold. But my main story coming out of that final was actually about Alyssa Nair, like, becoming this kind of friendship, like the Sophia Trinity Mal relationship with Alyssa and, like, what that has done for the 4 of them. And that's a story that I don't know if I would have told earlier in my career. And it was just because I went in being like, I'm going to write an Alyssa Nair feature this Olympics, right? Like, she's playing out of her mind, all this stuff, right? And then that just happened. And so being able to, like, be there in person, right? To, like, have that investment from The Athletic of being there in person and following them around the south of France, which is not the worst assignment ever, I will tell you. But, like, again, be at those trainings and be the only one at training to be able to see some of those smaller moments that aren't generally going to be seen by the public. Like, that's something really cool and special.
I mean, after all that we've all been through, like, community is always at the heart of it. And I think the women's soccer community is so special and has given so much to all of us. And I know if you ever want to write a book, what journalists and athletes have in common, I could co-author that with you because my mind is blown. But thank you so much for being on the Recap Show. We really appreciate this conversation. So much relatable, beautiful conversation here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you.
Want more of the Recap Show? Never miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.